Vincent Marchetti had not made a personal phone call in 11 years. His lawyers called. His aides called. His silence, when deployed correctly, communicated more than most men managed with a prepared speech. So when his private line rang and the voice on the other end said simply, "This is Vincent," Diana Reeves understood three things simultaneously: that something had gone wrong, that she was the reason, and that the kind of wrong that put Vincent Marchetti on a personal phone call did not get fixed with a policy memo and a disciplinary file. What she didn't understand yet, what she wouldn't understand until she walked into his office and saw who was already sitting there, was just how catastrophically she had miscalculated the value of the man she had thrown away that morning. You already know the call got made. You already know Diana walked into that office. What you don't know yet is everything that had to happen first, and why it changed everything after. Subscribe so you catch every chapter, like if you're already on Darius's side, and share this, because this story deserves a bigger room. Let's begin. The conference room of Castellan Financial Group did not smell like success. It smelled like cold coffee and careful breathing, the specific scent of a room full of people trying not to be noticed. Diana Reeves stood at the head of the table and said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence was already working for her, moving through the room like weather, settling over 14 people who had learned, through various costly lessons, that the worst thing Diana Reeves could do to you was look at you the way she was looking at you right now, with the particular patience of someone who had already decided and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "The Marchetti audit begins in 40 minutes, she said finally, her voice carrying the unhurried precision of a surgeon making the first incision. "I trust everyone understands what is at stake." It was not a question. It was a perimeter fence, and everyone in the room knew to stay inside it. Near the middle of the table, Darius Okafor reviewed his notes with the quiet focus of a man who had learned long ago that the best armor in a room like this was simply being prepared. 38 years old, broad-shouldered, on the kind of still that is not passivity but its opposite. A man who had carried enough that he no longer needed to prove it. 6 years at Castellan. 6 years of arriving early, staying late, and solving problems quietly so that other people could take the credit loudly. He did not look up when Diana spoke. He already knew his numbers. His numbers were always right. His phone sat face down on the table beside his legal pad. He had put it face down that morning, a small private discipline, a signal to himself that for the next 8 hours he was a professional first and a father second. It was a bargain he had made with himself every morning for 3 years, since the day he became the only parent Kofi had. The phone buzzed once. He did not look at it. It buzzed again. Something in his chest shifted, a subtle wrongness, in the particular frequency of a father's instinct that has no rational basis, but has never once been wrong. He turned the phone over. The screen read, "Riverside Academy. Main office." The room continued around him. Diana was speaking. Someone was pulling up a spreadsheet. The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent corporate hymn. Darius looked at the phone, then at the door, then at the phone again, and made the only decision a man like him was ever really going to make. What happened next would take less than 4 minutes to set in motion and less than 4 hours to become irreversible. By the time the Marchetti representatives arrived in the lobby, Darius Okafor was already in his car, running 2 red lights on the way to his son. By the time the audit concluded, Diana had already decided what it meant. And by the time the city darkened into evening and the towers of Charlotte began to glow against a bruise-colored sky, a man named Vincent Marchetti, a man whose calls were returned before the second ring by people who governed nations, was reading a 4-sentence email from a young woman named Priya. He read it once, set it down on his desk, read it again. Then he picked up his phone and made a call that Diana Reeves would spend the rest of her career trying to understand. But to understand where that call led, you have to understand where this story actually began. Not in a boardroom, and not with a medical emergency, but in a hospital room 3 years earlier, where a 9-year-old boy named Kofi woke up without his mother and reached for the hand that was already there, his father's hand, the only one that was always, without fail, already there. Darius didn't choose between being a father and being a professional. He chose his son, and paid the price that good people should never have to pay. If that resonated with you, hit the like button. Share this with someone raising children alone and showing up anyway. Subscribe because more stories like this are coming. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been Darius? Have you ever paid a price for doing the right thing? He made it 11 steps down the corridor before he answered. Mr. Okafor? The voice on the other end was a woman's, measured, professional, with the particular gentleness of someone trained to deliver difficult information without causing additional damage. This is Nurse Tatum at Riverside Academy. Kofi is okay. I want to say that first. He's conscious and stable. But he had a seizure about 20 minutes ago, during third period. He's asking for you. Darius stood very still in the empty hallway, one hand flat against the wall. The sound of the conference room bled faintly through the closed door behind him. Diana's voice, a slide advancing, the shuffle of papers. "I'm on my way," he said. And that was the entire conversation. He had learned Kofi's particular pattern, the way you learn any language spoken by someone you love. Through immersion, through repetition, through the specific fear of getting it wrong. The seizures came in clusters, usually triggered by disrupted sleep or elevated stress. Last night, Kofi had been anxious about a math test. He had asked Darius to check his work 3 times. Darius had checked it 3 times, said it was perfect 3 times, and still Kofi had lain awake until nearly 10, his small mind turning the numbers over like river stones. I should have kept him home. The thought arrived with the sharp clarity of hindsight, which is always perfectly accurate and always too late. He pulled up his team lead's number and typed quickly, precisely, the message of a man doing everything correctly while everything inside him was already somewhere else. Family medical emergency. Kofi. Audit notes flagged and organized in the shared drive. Chen can walk the Marchetti team through sections 4 through 7. I'm sorry. He sent it before the apology could become something larger than it needed to be. Then he walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the parking garage, and did not look back. A days had been gone 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days, and he did not count anymore, or told himself he didn't. But the number lived in him the way certain songs lived in him, surfacing without invitation at the wrong moments. She had been here, and then she hadn't, and the space she left was not empty, but occupied, densely, by everything she should have still been doing. Packing Kofi's lunch, arguing about which plants survived in low light, laughing at things that weren't that funny because she had always found the world funnier than it deserved. The epilepsy had started 6 months after her death. Stress-induced, the neurologist had said, in the careful tone doctors use when science and grief occupy the same sentence. Darius had nodded and thanked him and driven home and sat in his parked car for 25 minutes before going inside. And his son's body had begun to carry what his son's heart didn't yet have the language to express. He understood that. He carried things without language, too. Kofi was in a room at the end of a short hallway, small against the white of the hospital bed, in the way children always looked in hospital beds, miniaturized, provisional, as if the room itself was designed for a different scale of suffering. His eyes were open when Darius walked in, tired and slightly unfocused, the particular look of a brain that had been through something and was still finding its way back. He turned his head toward the door. "You came," he said. His voice was quiet and factual, the way 9-year-olds state the things they are most relieved about, as simple observation, because they have not yet learned to dress their vulnerability up as something else. Darius crossed the room, pulled the chair close, and took his son's hand in both of his. "Always," he said. Kofi's fingers tightened around his. Outside the window, the city went on doing what cities do. Indifferent, continuous, loud with its own concerns. Inside that small room, none of it reached them. The audit, the spreadsheets, the $12 million account, and the woman at the head of the table. All of it receded to a frequency Darius could no longer hear. There was only the warmth of his son's hand. There was only this. The audit concluded without catastrophe. That was the most that could be said for it. The two Marchetti associates, junior enough to be sent, senior enough to notice things, had paused once, briefly, when Diana advanced to Section 4 of the presentation and the expected voice did not materialize. And she had covered the gap herself, smoothly, without acknowledging it. One of them had glanced at the empty chair, the other had written something in the margin of his folder. Minor. Recoverable. A small stone dropped in still water. Diana watched the ripple all the way home. She called the meeting for 8 the following morning. No agenda distributed, no subject line beyond the names of every member of the Risk and Compliance Division. In the particular language of Castellan's internal culture, that combination, all names, no agenda, Diana's signature, translated with perfect clarity. Everyone understood. They came anyway, because there was no alternative to coming. The room filled in near silence, chairs scraped, laptops opened out of habit, and then sat unused, their screens a pretense of normalcy no one believed. Darius arrived and took his seat near the center of the table, his posture composed, his hands folded on the surface in front of him. He had known this was coming since the moment he started his car in the hospital parking garage the previous afternoon. He had driven home knowing. He had made Kofi scrambled eggs knowing. He had sat on the edge of his son's bed until Kofi fell asleep, knowing, and had decided somewhere in the quiet of that darkened room that knowing changed nothing. Diana entered without greeting anyone. She set her portfolio on the table, looked at the room once with the comprehensive efficiency of a general assessing terrain, and began. She did not begin with Darius. That was the sophistication of it, the thing that made it theatrical rather than merely cruel. She began with the Marchetti account, and with institutional responsibility, with what it meant to represent Castellan Financial Group in a client-facing context, how trust was not a feeling but a structure, how structures required every supporting beam to bear its designated load without exception and without excuse. She built it carefully, methodically, the way you construct a frame before you hang anything on it. By the time she turned to Darius, the frame was already in place. "Mr. Okafor." His name in her mouth landed like a door closing. "You left the building yesterday during a live client audit, without authorization, without adequate notice, without completing your assigned role in a $12 million review." She paused, letting each charge accumulate its own weight. "Would you like to explain that to the room?" 14 people did not move. Darius looked at her directly, not with defiance, with the level steadiness of a man who has nothing to hide and knows it, which is a different thing entirely. "My son had a seizure," he said. "I am his only parent." The room absorbed this. A human being would have absorbed it differently than Diana Reeves absorbed it. She tilted her head, a small, practiced movement, the visual equivalent of a sigh, and allowed a beat of silence that was not reflection, but theater. "And Castellan is your only employer," she said. Then, almost gently, "was." She said the rest without raising her voice, which was worse. Suspension without pay, pending formal review, security to escort him out, effective immediately, each sentence arriving with the clipped finality of a gavel, and the one after it, and the one after it. Priya stood in the doorway where she had come to deliver a message that no longer mattered. She watched Diana's face as she spoke. The composed satisfaction of it, the absence of anything resembling hesitation. and felt something in her own chest make a quiet, irreversible decision. Darius stood. He did not look at his colleagues. He gathered his jacket from the back of the chair with a deliberateness that was its own form of dignity, and he walked out. The room did not exhale. It held the breath it had taken when Diana said was, held it like something fragile, like something that, if released too quickly, might confirm that everyone in that room had just witnessed something they should have stood up to and hadn't. The silence said everything none of them would say aloud. Priya typed the suspension letter at 11:14 in the morning, which was 47 minutes after the meeting ended and 6 minutes after Diana had dictated it to her in a tone suggesting it was the most routine communication she had composed all week. Her keystrokes were precise. Her face was not. She formatted the header, inserted the date, typed Darius Okafor's full name and employee number into the appropriate fields. Then she stopped. She opened his employee file in a second window, not because she needed anything from it, but because something in her required the confirmation of what she already knew. 6 years, 4 consecutive excellence awards, the last one accompanied by a note from a senior partner describing his work as foundational to the division's analytical integrity. Not a single formal complaint, and not a single HR flag. A performance record so clean it looked almost fictional against the letter she was drafting. The 2 documents sitting side by side on her screen, like a before and after that made no sense in the order it had occurred. She stared at it for a long time. Then she finished the letter, formatted it correctly, and saved it to the outbox without sending it quite yet. Roland Vance learned about the suspension the way he learned about most uncomfortable things at Castellan. Secondhand, briefly, from the head of HR, who delivered it between 2 other agenda items as though burying it might change its weight. Diana's call, he said, when the HR director finished. She runs her division. He said it with the smooth reflexivity of a man who had perfected the art of non-involvement, and who understood that the distance between himself and a problem was the primary thing worth protecting. His assistant, who had worked for him long enough to read the specific quality of his silences, noted that he asked about the Marchetti account twice that afternoon. Not about Darius. Not about the circumstances of the suspension or the department-wide meeting that had preceded it. Only about the account. Whether the audit had concluded satisfactorily. Whether the relationship remained intact. She answered both times with what she knew, which was less than he wanted to hear. In the break room on the 14th floor, 2 of Darius's colleagues from accounting stood near the window with their coffee going cold, speaking in the low registers people use when they want to be heard only by each other. "No, someone should say something," the first one said. "To who?" said the second. The first one had no answer for that. They stood there a moment longer, caught in the particular paralysis of people who know what the right thing is and also know the cost of doing it, and cannot yet determine which discomfort they are more willing to carry. They finished their coffee. They went back to their desks. Nothing happened, as expected, as always. At 2:17, Priya opened a browser tab and navigated to the Marchetti Foundation's public filing records, a page she had visited once before, 3 months ago, when Darius had mentioned in passing the way he mentioned most things about his life outside Castellan, quietly and without emphasis, that he did some pro bono work for their philanthropic arm. But she had noted the contact email then without entirely knowing why. The instinct of someone who paid attention in rooms where no one expected her to. She found the address. She opened a new email window. She wrote 4 sentences. She did not draft them first. She did not read them back. She sent the email before the part of her brain responsible for self-preservation could compose a convincing argument against it. Then she closed the tab, straightened the already straight items on her desk, and returned to her work. 43 floors up, Diana stood at her office window as the afternoon light shifted over Charlotte's skyline. The city arranged below her like a confirmation of everything she believed about order and consequence and the necessity of standards maintained without sentiment. She had handled it cleanly, swiftly, correctly. And she was sure of this, in the complete and unexamined way of someone who has not yet received any information to the contrary. She would be sure of it until she wasn't. If Priya's 4 sentences moved you, if you've ever been the only person in a room willing to do the right thing, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Diana walks into Vincent's office. Share this with someone who needs to hear that quiet integrity always finds its moment. And drop a comment below. Would you have sent that email? The Marchetti estate sat 12 miles outside Charlotte on a plot of land that did not advertise itself. No gate with initials worked into the iron. No fountain visible from the road. Just a long private drive lined with old oak trees that had been there before the money and would likely outlast it, leading to a house that was large without being ostentatious. The architecture of someone who had nothing left to prove. Inside, in a study on the ground floor where the shelves ran floor to ceiling and the books on them showed the specific wear of things that had actually been read, Vincent Marchetti sat at his desk in the early evening quiet and turned a page. He was 71 years old, silver-haired, dark-skinned, unhurried in the particular way of men who have learned that urgency is mostly theater. He wore reading glasses and a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. There were no bodyguards visible, no staff moving through the corridors. Just the house settling around him in the cooling air, and the lamp on his desk casting its steady warm circle, and the book open in his hands. Soren knocked once and entered without waiting for an answer, which was the arrangement. He was 30, efficient, and had learned in 2 years of working for Vincent Marchetti that the most important skill the job required was knowing what to interrupt and what to let pass. He placed a single printed page on the desk beside the book. Vincent preferred things printed. He said screens encouraged skimming, and skimming was how people missed what mattered. Vincent finished his paragraph. Then he picked up the page and read it. He set it down. He looked at the middle distance for a moment, not troubled, not reactive, simply processing with the unhurried thoroughness of someone for whom good judgment was not a performance but a practice. Then he picked it up and read it again. 3 years ago, an analyst at Castellan Financial Group had sent an unmarked communication to the Marchetti Foundation's compliance office flagging a structural irregularity in their international giving portfolio. A misclassification in the reporting framework for 3 overseas subsidiaries that, left unaddressed, would have triggered a federal audit within 18 months, the kind of audit that did not end quietly. The analyst had asked for nothing, had not signed his name to the initial communication, though it had not taken Vincent's people long to find it. Had declined, politely and without elaboration, the job offer that followed. Had accepted, with what Vincent's assistant described as genuine surprise, the handwritten note of thanks. They had stayed in occasional contact since, not frequent, not performative, and the specific contact of 2 people who respected each other enough not to manufacture reasons to speak, and trusted that when a reason arose, it would be sufficient. The printed email in Vincent's hand was a reason. He set it down, removed his reading glasses, and picked up his phone. He did not call Diana Reeves. He did not yet know her name, and it did not matter. He called Roland Vance, whose number he had possessed for 4 years and used twice, both times to significant effect. Roland answered on the second ring, which told Vincent everything he needed to know about how the Castellan CEO was spending his evening. Roland. He did not identify himself. He didn't need to. I understand there was an incident yesterday involving Darius Okafor. I'd like to speak with the person responsible. Tomorrow evening. My office. A pause that was not uncertainty but courtesy. The space left for a response that was, functionally, already determined. 7 o'clock. Of course, Roland said. Absolutely. I'll arrange it. He had agreed before he finished forming the thought to agree. Vincent said thank you, which he meant, and ended the call. He put his glasses back on and returned to his book. The lamp continued its steady work. The oaks outside moved in a wind too slight to hear. The chapter resumed exactly where he had left it. 12 miles away, in a modest apartment in Oakwood Heights, Darius Okafor sat on the edge of his son's bed, reading aloud from a book about a girl who navigated the stars. Kofi's head grew heavier against his arm with every page, his breathing deepening into the slow, reliable rhythm of a child finally, completely safe. And Darius read until the rhythm held. Then he sat a while longer in the dark, his son's warmth against his side, not moving, not thinking about tomorrow. Just there. Fully. Quietly there. Roland was waiting outside her office. That was the first thing wrong. In 11 years, Roland Vance had never waited outside her office. He had called ahead, scheduled through Priya, sent emails with the careful formality of a man who understood that Diana's time was a resource he was permitted to request, but not assume. He was standing in the corridor with his hands in his pockets and an expression she had never seen on him before. Not quite fear, not quite apology, but the specific blankness of a man holding information he wished someone else had received instead. "Roland." She kept walking, expecting him to fall into step. He didn't. What is it?" "Vincent Marchetti has requested a meeting." He said it the way you set something fragile on a surface, carefully, with attention to how it landed. "With you. This evening. His office. 7 o'clock. Diana stopped, turned. "Requested," she said. Roland's expression answered the question she was actually asking. His eyes did the thing eyes did when the word requested was doing the work of a different word entirely. "I'll be there," she said. He nodded and left faster than the distance required. She spent the day performing herself. 2 meetings, both conducted with her usual precision. 3 reports reviewed and returned with annotations. 17 emails composed and sent, each one calibrated to its recipient, purposeful, unrushed. From the outside, Diana Reeves was exactly what she always was, composed, directed, at the fixed point around which the division oriented itself. Priya observed all of it from her desk with the careful neutrality of someone who had already processed the thing everyone else was still approaching. She refilled Diana's coffee without being asked. She held 2 calls. She did not make eye contact more than necessary, not out of hostility but out of the particular discretion of someone who knows the shape of what is coming and has decided, in the privacy of her own conscience, that it has been earned. Diana noticed the neutrality without naming it. She filed it somewhere she did not intend to open today. The Marchetti Group Tower was in uptown Charlotte, 12 floors of dark glass set back from the street on a block that did not announce itself. No corporate logo above the entrance. No branded lobby installation. A single reception desk, staffed by a woman who confirmed Diana's name against a list, handed her a key card without elaborating on its purpose, and gestured toward an elevator with the efficiency of someone who had learned that most questions resolved themselves if you waited long enough. The elevator required the key card. The corridor it opened onto was long and quiet and carpeted in something that absorbed footsteps entirely, so that Diana arrived at the end of it having heard nothing of her own approach. A door, dark wood, already open. She stepped through it. The office was not what she had constructed in her mind during the drive over. No power architecture, no deliberate intimidation of scale. Books, a desk with a lamp. A man of 70-something in a well-fitted jacket who looked up from whatever he had been reviewing with the unhurried attention of someone whose time was valuable precisely because he chose not to perform that value. Vincent Marchetti looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize, which was itself disorienting. She was good at categorizing expressions. It was one of the skills she had built her career on. Then he gestured, almost imperceptibly, toward the chair across from his desk, and Diana saw who was already sitting in the other one. Darius Okafor, still in a jacket, composed, his hands resting with the ease of a man who had slept without difficulty and arrived without dread. He turned his head when she entered. His face carried no triumph, no performance of any kind. He simply looked at her with the steady, unflinching calm of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone in this room, including himself. The geometry of it assembled in her mind one piece at a time, slowly, then all at once, the way structural failures always announce themselves. Not with a crash, but with the quiet, irreversible recognition of a load-bearing thing giving way. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea. Vincent did not invite her to sit. He looked at her when she entered, acknowledged her presence with a brief nod, and returned his attention to the document on his desk. Diana stood. The silence was not aggressive, it was simply his, and he was not finished with it yet. When he finally gestured toward the chair beside Darius, it was with the unhurried ease of a man operating entirely on his own schedule, in his own time, and by his own measure of when things were ready. She sat. Darius did not look at her. Vincent set the document aside and folded his hands. 3 years ago, he began, without preamble, Darius identified a compliance irregularity in our international giving portfolio that would have triggered a federal audit within 18 months. He found it doing work no one asked him to do, on behalf of an organization he had no formal relationship with. He flagged it through proper channels, asked for nothing in return, and declined the position I subsequently offered him. He paused. He said he had responsibilities at Castellan he didn't want to leave unfinished. The particular weight of that sentence settled over Diana like something physical. Vincent continued. 2 years of pro bono advisory work, like a portfolio restructuring that had increased the foundation's operational efficiency by 31%. 3 occasions on which Darius's judgment had redirected significant resources away from what would have been costly institutional errors. All of it delivered quietly, without documentation of his own contribution, without leverage, without expectation. He did not oversell it. He didn't need to. The architecture of it was sufficient. Then he stopped. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the same measured weight as everything before it. Not louder, not harder, simply more precise. You suspended this man, in front of his colleagues, for leaving to be with his son during a medical emergency. A pause that was not theatrical but functional, the space required for words to land at their full depth. Oh, you called it professional abandonment. Another pause. What would you call what you did? Diana opened her mouth. She heard herself invoke company policy, the framework, the precedent, the structural necessity of consistent enforcement. And even as the words came out, she felt their inadequacy, the way you feel the weakness in a material only when you're applying weight to it. The sentences were correct. They were accurate. They felt like paper. Vincent listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. I am not interested in your policy, he said when she finished. I am interested in your judgment. And your judgment tells me something about the kind of institution Castellan has become under your management. He let that sit. I'll be withdrawing our account. That the formal communication goes to Roland tomorrow morning. $12 million. Delivered in the tone of someone describing a change in weather. Diana felt it move through her like cold water finding a level. Then Vincent turned to Darius, and his voice changed. Not dramatically, but in the specific way a room changes when a window opens. Darius, I'd like to offer you the full-time operational directorship of the foundation, effective when you're ready. Flexible structure, your terms. A brief pause. Kofi's school schedule takes precedence. Always. Darius nodded once. Yes, he said quietly. Thank you. He did not look at Diana. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was complete. Diana sat inside it and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, that she had no prepared response, no framework, and no policy to invoke. "Is there anything—" she began. The question cost her something. It showed. "Is there anything I can do?" Vincent studied her for a moment with the patience of someone who had watched this particular discovery happen in other people before and understood it required a certain amount of time to become real. "That's the right question," he said. "I don't know yet if you're asking it for the right reasons." Darius paused beside her chair on his way out. He did not touch her shoulder. He did not offer comfort or condemnation. He simply stopped, briefly, and said, "I hope Kofi's okay becomes something you think about eventually. Not because of any of this." A quiet beat. "Just because he is." Then he left. And Diana sat alone in the warm lamplight with the undeflectable weight of a verdict that had been delivered without a single raised voice. The office at the Marchetti Foundation was smaller than his old one at Castellan, and it overlooked a courtyard where someone had planted a garden that was clearly tended by a person who knew what they were doing. Lavender along the near border, a fig tree in the corner that had no business being that healthy this far into autumn. Darius had taken to leaving his window cracked in the mornings just to let the air in. Kofi's latest drawing was taped beside his monitor. A rocket ship this time, rendered in the confident lines of a child who has graduated from representation to interpretation. Not what a rocket looked like, but what a rocket meant. Beside it, a small figure with a briefcase and a wide smile that bore, Darius felt, a generous resemblance to himself. He was on a call when he noticed the drawing catching the afternoon light, and something moved through him, uncomplicated, unhurried, and he laughed. Genuinely, from somewhere unguarded. The person on the other end laughed too, and they continued, and the work was good, and the afternoon held. He picked Kofi up from school at 2:30 on a Tuesday because he could. Kofi emerged from the double doors in the middle of a stream of children, spotted his father against the car, and broke into the particular run of a child who has not yet learned to moderate his enthusiasm in public and has not yet been given any reason to. He arrived slightly breathless, backpack bouncing, and looked up with an expression that had not yet decided between dignity and delight. "Can we get ice cream?" "Yes," Darius said, and they did. Kofi got 2 scoops, chocolate and something aggressively blue, and ate it with the focused dedication of a person for whom this was the primary business of the afternoon. They sat on a bench outside the shop and said nothing much about nothing important, and the sun moved through the trees above them in the unhurried way of autumn light that knows it is running out and has decided to be generous anyway. It was a Tuesday. It was entirely ordinary. It was, Darius thought, exactly enough. At Castellan, the withdrawal of the Marchetti account had opened a wound that 3 meetings with Roland and a notification to the board had done nothing to close. $12 million was not a number that quietly redistributed itself. It left a shape. The shape was visible, and visibility was the particular currency Diana had spent 11 years accumulating and was now watching depreciate in real time. Her position survived, diminished but intact, the corporate equivalent of a structure still standing after something foundational had been quietly removed, which everyone could see and no one said aloud. Priya's transfer request arrived on a Wednesday. 4 lines. No explanation offered. Diana read it twice, approved it without annotation, and sat for a moment after with her hand still resting on the mouse. She did not contest it. She understood, in the slow and uncomfortable way of someone learning a language they should have spoken years ago, and that contesting it would simply be another version of the same error. The assumption that her preferences superseded someone else's considered judgment about what they could no longer be part of. Priya's silence told her more than any exit interview ever would. That evening, Alone in her office with Charlotte doing what it always did outside her window, luminous, indifferent, continuous, Diana opened Darius's employee file for the second time in 2 weeks. 6 years. Not a single accommodation requested. 4 awards. A compliance record so clean it looked almost deliberate. A man who had given every measurable thing asked of him, and one day asked for something in return, and been handed a security escort instead. She thought about a boy in a hospital bed saying you came as though arrival required confirmation. She thought about a room that held its breath and never quite released it. She opened a blank document. The cursor blinked against the white space with the patience of something that had learned to wait without judgment. She sat with it for a long time, the specific silence of a person who has run out of policies to hide behind and must now contend with the thing underneath. Then she began to type. Not a framework, not a memo, not a revision of something that already existed. Something that started with the word I and did not immediately follow it with expect or require or have determined. Something without a template. Something that required, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, that she tell the truth about herself to herself, which is always the hardest document to draft and the only one that matters. When the city lights held steady outside her window, she kept typing. Across Charlotte, in a bedroom decorated with planets and the particular optimism of a child who has not yet been told to dream smaller, Darius sat on the edge of his son's bed and opened the book with the girl astronaut on the cover, the one with the cracked spine and the pages gone soft from handling. He had memorized it long ago. So had Kofi. He read aloud anyway, and Kofi, already drifting toward sleep, mouthed the words silently alongside him. Not because he needed to follow along, but because he loved the story enough that it had become part of his breathing, part of the quiet rhythm his body kept, even at the very edge of consciousness. Darius read until the rhythm held. Then he closed the book, turned off the lamp, and sat a moment longer in the good dark, listening to his son breathe, steady, safe, unburdened. Outside, the city continued its indifferent, luminous work. Inside, there was only this. If this story moved you, if you know someone who showed up faithfully and was dismissed without a second thought, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me, who did you think of while you were watching? Because I have a feeling you already know. And that feeling is exactly why this story needed to be told.